Welcome everyone to today's webinar, Coast to Coast on how nonprofits are thriving past COVID-19. Now, before I hand it off to our amazing presenters, there are just a few housekeeping items I want to address. So if you're joining us here today for CPE, you definitely want to make sure you're actively responding to all of our polling questions. Today we'll have 4, and that you also stay on for the duration of the broadcast. And just as a reminder, we are recording today, and the recording along with our slides will be available within 48 hours. And we definitely encourage you to ask questions via the chat function or the Q&A in your toolbar. So today's learning objectives are to discuss how the New York Philharmonic launched several new initiatives, including a streaming service, identify key learnings that took the Woodland Park Zoo from an initial projected loss of almost 15 million to an actual loss of only 500K after the PPP of 5.34 million, and examine the Children's Discovery Museum of San Jose's flexibility and creativity with moving to more virtual content despite the challenges of multiple closures and reopenings over the past year, and to review actionable solutions to move forward. So before we truly kick it off, we do have a first polling question. So starting off with something fun, what has been your pandemic hobby? So cooking and baking, crafts and games, new exercise outlet, or have you become a new cocktail master? We'll give everyone just a few more seconds here to respond. Okay. So looks like new exercise is the winner here. Very cool.
I know Dean would like that. I'm more of the cocktail master, but I look like the lowest one here.
Matt, I'm not gonna lie to you. I haven't had a drink in 2021.
Wow, better man than me.
It's turned into a superpower. It's turned into something really good. But I bet you that there's a lot of people who've had a lot of drinks on today's call, and I think we're really gonna shed some light on some really exciting things. Why don't you take it, Matt?
Yeah, no, great. And thanks everybody for joining us today. I'm really excited for this webinar and to hear the stories of the great organizations we have on this call. Usually when I'm doing webinars, it's on a boring technical accounting topic. So I'm happy to, to be involved in something that's a little more interesting and fun for you all. So, the main purpose or reason we thought about doing this webinar is I lead our museum and arts practice here at Armanino, and for these organizations that primarily deal with visitors, when a pandemic hits and you can no longer have the visitors that you usually have, how do you deal with it? And over the last year, by working with so many organizations in this space, I've been hearing amazing stories of the challenges they've had, but what innovations have come from that, what ways they've pivoted, all of that. And after hearing so many of them, I said, it'd be great to do a webinar to highlight some of these great organizations and benefit all those others out there that are having similar challenges and thinking of how to carry forward with this. So as you can see, we have a great panel here today. I'll start by introducing Adam Cox from the New York Philharmonic to go ahead and give us an overview of the organization and the past year and where you are today.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Matt. So just a couple of high points. The New York Philharmonic is about 178, 179 years old. So we are the oldest symphony orchestra in the United States. Our kind of pre-COVID, pre-pandemic steady state operating budget was around 85 million. We have about a $225 million endowment, thanks to some of the recent, I guess the 2020 investment performance, which ended up being pretty good for us. In terms of kind of the overall business model breakdown, we're, as you can see, 38% earned revenue, so that's mostly ticket sales. The endowment draw accounts for about 14% of our overall revenue, and then the remainder of the 48% is, of course, contributed. So that's essentially the annual fund. We've got about 225 employees overall. We've got 95 full-time musicians. We have 106 spots, but we have 95 full-time musicians in the core, and then we have about 130 administrative staff. I guess just a couple of words about where the Philharmonic is currently. Our last concert actually was March 10th of last year. And since that time, we've been essentially unable to gather in person for full concerts, although we have done some recordings with the musicians and so forth. I'll touch on that a little bit later. In a normal year, we'd probably do about 45 weeks of programming. That's about 120 concerts in New York. We do a tour and a residency through China. We do a residency at the Bravo Vale Festival in Colorado. And we also do some concerts in local spots in New York City, like Central Park, as an example. Primary concert hall or performance space is David Geffen Hall, which is on the Lincoln Center campus. That's also where our offices have historically been, although during the pandemic, we've converted to a 100% virtual setup. So all of our employees are at home doing Zoom, like all of us, I guess, at the moment. And although I think most of the musicians have essentially been inactive through this period since the pandemic, we have continued to pay them, which I think makes us a little bit unique in the orchestra world anyway. And in terms of, I guess, our expectation of reopening, we have a 21-22 season that we are expecting to announce in June, and that season will start, we hope, at the end of September.
Great, thanks, Adam. I'll turn it over to Marilee Jennings from Children's Discovery Museum of San Jose.
And I remembered to unmute, so it's off to a good start. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here. I'm the director of the museum in downtown San Jose. We have about an 80,000 square foot facility, which includes 50,000 square feet of indoor exhibit space and 30,000 square feet of outdoor space. And we were looking very forward to celebrating our 30th anniversary in June of 2020, but sadly closed on March 5th and have remained closed with the exception of kind of opening and then closing and then opening and closing our outdoor space. What's, I think, wonderful about our museum is that we specialize in hands-on learning in a social context. So our focus is kids ages 2 to 8, and our fundamental belief is in immersive engagement. It means that that we don't rely on reading and talking. We rely on putting out experiences that naturally draw kids in. We believe that kids learn from those, from the doing, but also from the interactions with the people around them. Over the 30 years, our budget had grown to $10 million. And in the context of children's museums, we're on the large end. And over the years, we had built up $7 million in reserves and endowment. Our business model calls for 50% earned income, revenue through the gate, mostly in ticket sales and memberships, and 50% of contributed income. And on March 5th, we closed with 120 employees on the payroll. So on March 5th, earned income stopped altogether. And with the exception of some revenues generated when we were able to open our outdoor space, we've survived entirely on contributed income over the 14 months, along with obviously some SBA support. We're very excited that our plan is to reopen on Friday morning at 10 o'clock to 25% capacity. And while we know that we'll operate at a loss, the board decided that it was so important for downtown San Jose that someone get the ball rolling. We decided it was our museum. We had to say goodbye to about 80% of our staff. So we have a small crew of 22 people who will joyfully welcome our first visitors on Friday.
Thanks, Marilee. Yeah, great news. Excited for your reopening. And last but not least, I'll turn over to Woodland Park Zoo, and I'll start with Michele Smith, and she can introduce the organization and her team.
Sure, thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Michele Smith, and I'm the Chief Financial Officer here at Woodland Park Zoo. And I have two amazing colleagues with me, that I would not be able to get through last year without, and they will introduce themselves very shortly. We closed the zoo on March 12th, 2020. Seattle was actually the epicenter for the virus. So we were one of the first cultural institutions to close here in Seattle. Woodland Park Zoo is a 122-year-old institution. We are a 92-acre zoo in a neighborhood in Seattle called Finney Ridge. In a normal year, we have 1.3 to 1.4 million visitors. And Valerie will really go through some of the business model slides to talk about where we were with our revenue and how we forecasted and came to recovery. Our staffing is usually 350 regular staff, and we usually add 100 plus seasonals in our normal summers. And for us, our philosophy when we were closed is that we strayed away from our strategic and operational plan and adopted a back to basics plan to navigate through COVID-19. You'll hear Toni talk about how we reimagined and put together a reopening plan that was 90 pages to the governor with help from our governmental affairs team. And for us as a zoo, we just couldn't close our doors and walk away when we were shut down. We have 1,000 endangered species in our care. And our overall philosophy that was our employees were our biggest assets, and communication and transparency through 2020 was extremely important to us for the success, because it's been a zoo-wide effort for us to come and be out of recovery. As of today, we are in phase 3. And that means we are at a no limit capacity on our grounds, but a 50% capacity of our buildings. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Toni Godwin-Sells to introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Toni Godwin-Sells. I'm what they call a Senior Director of Operations, Events and Grounds, which is basically everything that impacts the facilities at Woodland Park Zoo. So you can imagine my whole world just flipped upside down with this pandemic, because as Michele said, our first and foremost care is our collection of our animals. They haven't all developed thumbs yet, so we're their first line of defense. So you can imagine what we went through in looking at our operations. How do we keep our staff safe? How do we mentally keep them motivated and keep their morale going? And also make sure that our operations comply with CDC mandates, which is a very new and logistical challenge, which I'll share more later. We came through this, I think, very well. We are still open. And as Michele said, to these very good points, we're in phase 3. We're moving forward, constantly pivoting. It's the favorite word of the year, last year and this year. We'll use that a lot, but thank you. That is my area of here at the Woodland Park Zoo.
And I'm Valerie Krueger, the Senior Finance Director. And as such, I brought some slides because I'm one of those visual people, and I believe a pie chart is worth 1,000 words. So here's some pie charts for you. Oops, go back to the pie chart. Okay, great. Wanted to show how our budget was, extremely impacted last year. We thought we would bring in about 45 million in operating revenues. Instead, we were 35% down before the PPP, which was, a godsend. So thank goodness you can see the yellow piece of the pie coming in for our actual totals for the year. That 5.4 million really helped us out. So then we ended up only down 22% for operating revenues. But I just want to mention that we did have a couple sectors that did not go down, like our public support. We're fortunate to have both the city of Seattle and the local county support us. And fundraising had a good year, believe it or not. We thought we would, not, but they ended up ahead of budget this year. So it was really the earned revenues that took the hit, of course. Membership, we were down 1.6 million or 40% off budget. Of course, we were closed for 3 months, and we even extended everybody's memberships. So that will hurt into the future. But visitor revenues, that piece of the pie, went from almost 21 million down to 6.5 million. That's a $14 million hit or 69% of our earned revenues are visitor revenues, which include admissions, parking, on-grounds revenue like food and retail commissions, and then events like concerts. We usually have a big concert series. Of course, couldn't do it. All right, next slide. I just threw out a few things that we did. Of course, March, April of last year, immediately held expenses just to what we could consider necessities. And we worked on projection scenarios. Remember, everybody thought we would open in a couple weeks at first, but pretty soon we realized, okay, it's going to be a month or few months. So we had pessimistic, optimistic, moderate scenarios to help us plan. And as soon as we heard about the PPP loan, well, then everybody's spirits lifted, because that obviously was going to be a big help. Then it became a huge calculation deal and a race to get it in. But, and we thought it was just going to be 6 weeks. We still did our staff reductions, our layoffs after the end of that PPP 6-week period. Or was it 9 weeks? Now memory's starting to fade, but as soon as that initial PPP period was over, we did lay off about 30 people. We met with our bank. We have a $4 million line of credit. We wanted to make sure that was solid, and it was, and we could have even received a higher line of credit if we needed it. Basically resisted panicking and created a liquidity plan in addition to the line of credit. Looked at our board designated endowment, made sure we could get to that. Could we, get an extra endowment disbursement, and what other sources do we have for liquidity? All right, next slide, please. Just a quick look at expenses. We didn't reduce zoo operating expenses as much as the other pieces of the pie, but we did take our budgeted expenses from 46 million and only spent 35 million last year. So marketing, events, etc., that they were able to decrease the most because we cut our advertising and we didn't have the concert expenses. And then unfortunately, education took a big hit also. Okay, I'll stop there. I'll just let you look at the numbers on the screen. All right, the next slide just is a summary of how we did lose 5.8 million. And we, like was mentioned earlier, we thought it was going to be even worse, but our revenues came in a little higher than projected. And then our expenses were even lower than what we thought they might be when we did a projection in the early fall. So with that PPP,
looks like might have lost Valerie. So such as is in this world we live in now. So I guess with that, we'll just continue to move through the presentation, and I guess we have a polling question before we start into some questions. So I guess second polling question. Did your organization have an internal plan to deal with the effects of a crisis such as COVID-19? Yes, we were able to put into action. Yes, but we learned there were holes in our plan. No, because of COVID-19, we have started to create one. And no, we still don't have a plan for the future. And if that's the case, I'm not sure if you're still open, if you have no plan. So probably like most of us who'd never anticipated, a more than year-long pandemic, might not have had the plan in place previously, but now have one and moving forward to be ready for anything that might happen in the future.
And Matt, real quick, when we see results like that on a polling question like that, I do want to let everyone know that, yeah, that is what we've seen throughout our nonprofit practice, right? We've seen a lot of organizations that said, yeah, we don't really need to do that assessment. We feel like we're okay there. And all of a sudden, when the need happened, it was like, oh man, I really wish we would have made that small investment earlier and it would have maybe helped us here. But now we're moving forward. I just want to let everybody know, very, very common.
And Dean, I think you're up to start with the questions.
All right. Well, with that said, I think, we'll start with Marilee. As the executive director, why don't we talk about, I mean, you already highlighted numerous of the challenges, but as the executive director leading your nonprofit, what was your biggest challenge dealing with COVID-19, right? You, your management team, your board, what was the biggest challenge? And then we'll start going deeper into it.
I think the biggest challenge results from the nature of our business, which is our core belief that children learn best through hands-on engagement. And all of a sudden, COVID-19 arrives, and you're not allowed to do any shared touching. You cannot be in crowded environments where families are interacting with one another. And so it just called our core business into question. And so while we had hopes that we would be able to reopen, in a couple months or whatever, fundamentally, we knew that we'd be among the last, simply because of the nature of the experiences we offer. So we had to move very quickly. We had to make very difficult decisions about our staff. The decision to lay off 80% of our staff, when in 30 years we had never laid off an employee, was soul crushing, to say the least. So many tough decisions right out of the gate.
Great. Yeah, I can only imagine how tough that would be. So as a result, you, like you said, you knew you'd be one of the last to reopen. Kind of where did you turn from there? What innovations may have resulted? How did you pivot? What were, different things that you decided to do, knowing that it might be quite a while before you're able to reopen to visitors?
Right. It wasn't obvious to us at first, but what started happening really within the first week of being closed were parents writing emails saying, we need help. I'm trying to work from home and go to Zoom meetings, and the kids are bouncing off the walls. Isn't there some way you can help us? And we started looking at the digital platform. It had never been our strong suit. We have a technology museum just 2 blocks away. So our museum was always very low tech. Even when we went out into the community, our van would pull up and we'd unload, crate after crate of materials to work with kids. So it was not a natural fit for us to try to pivot to the virtual world. But then we discovered that when you started to look at the experience for 3, 4, 5-year-olds, actually, there wasn't a lot of really high quality programming happening for that age group. And then if you realize that really most of the digital programming is focused on kids who speak English, and our programming is all in English, Spanish, and Vietnamese, we suddenly discovered our niche. And our very creative staff pivoted quickly. Everybody has cell phones. And so our museum educators started doing what they do best around art, science, and story reading type programming, videotaping themselves from home. And very soon we were able to roll out the virtual Purple Museum, which continues on today, and we will most likely continue on even after we open our doors to serve those who aren't ready to come back.
Yeah, that's awesome. As someone who has a 5-year-old that's been doing Zoom school for most of the year, I know we took advantage of similar offerings out there to keep them on track and let me get some work done, right?
Exactly.
Marilee, my question is, you said it. You're not. You have historically, that being the tech museum wasn't your identity. Was there any buy-in that you had to get from board members or management to make this kind of a pivot? And if there was, what did you do? How did those discussions go?
You know, that is such a good question. And I will say, because we were doing all of this at the end of March, the beginning of April, it was the obvious choice at that moment in time. Nobody ever said they agreed with this pivot long term, but as a strategy to continue to serve the community, which really depends upon us, this was definitely the right way to go. The hardest pivot was for the staff, you know, saying, I don't know how to do this. I don't even know, I've never made a video. But they all rallied and they worked together and figured out how to turn their living room into a science lab where they could do demonstrations. And over time, they got better and better and more confident. We even had a board member who was having such trouble with staff trying to manage kids and work, who said, you know, if you can pull this off, we'll sponsor you. So he wrote a check to make sure all the staff could be brought back full time to operate the virtual Purple Museum.
That's awesome. It sounds like you really engaged your quote unquote customer base, right? And you listened to what they were saying, and you found a donor who was willing to do it all. I mean, that's the triple whammy right there. That's amazing. What was the impact to the organization, right? You go through this pivot. Did it have a financial impact? Did it help at all?
You know, I wouldn't say that, well, we didn't generate any fees for the programming that we were doing, but it made our fundraising case very strong. You know, our commitment to underserved communities is our highest service priority. And so in addition to the virtual Purple Museum, we were packaging up hands-on kits in art and science and getting them out to specific communities. And so between those two things, how we were broad-based in our approach, and then we were going deep with kids who needed the extra support, it really bolstered our fundraising case.
Great. Thanks so much, Marilee, for telling those stories. Next, I think we'll go to Adam at New York Philharmonic. Start with kind of the same initial question. You know, looking back on the past year, what do you think are some of the biggest challenge or biggest challenges that you faced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, good question. I mean, I think overall it's sort of the uncertainty, right? The uncertainty in having to plan kind of in this environment where everything is so unstable or uncertain, both with regard to kind of time frame and impact. You know, the word that we threw around a lot in terms of, you know, management team discussions and board meetings was hibernation. And, you know, I know we've got a lot of CFOs and controllers on this webinar, and I think, you know, the financial analysis was probably the most challenging thing, because everything under that umbrella in terms of figuring out how much staff you can reduce. And in our case, we cut staff by about 40%, and we did it in two different tranches. We kind of did one in, I want to say it was June or so, and then another in maybe September or October. And we're still kind of working our way back up as it relates to staffing. But, you know, looking across really every single department, and thinking about, you know, who can we furlough, who can we lay off, what positions can we eliminate entirely? Is there any restructuring that can be done or accelerated, you know, that may have already been in the plans? So, you know, the staffing piece was definitely huge for us. But, you know, looking at donor and patron activities, you know, if you're thinking about hibernating primarily due to the cost structure, right? If you think your revenue streams are going to be impacted, you know, whatever way or whatever level, you know, you're trying to really reduce that cost structure. So you cover staffing first, you try to, you know, reduce the programming, but also in a way that still allows you to engage with your patrons. Because one of the primary concerns, I think, is that, you know, even though you may survive in the short term, if you don't continuously, you know, engage with your donors, with your board, with your patrons, that base is going to erode. And by the time you actually get back to a place where you're doing concerts or you're doing programming again, you know, you may have a much more difficult time reactivating some of these lapsed patrons or donors. And I think the other piece for us, you know, was really just around working with our musicians and working with the unions to really make them partners in this process, recognizing that, look, it's probably going to be a year or 18 months before, you guys pick up your instruments again. We can't operate in the kind of cost structure, a sort of steady state cost structure. What can we do to make you guys partners to try to achieve some of these concessions from a contractual standpoint, and then how can we kind of balance that out in the long term? So that's probably a long way of answering your question, but it's, again, all under this umbrella of pivoting and reacting and doing it really quickly from a financial perspective.
Love that, Adam. I mean, yeah, that sounds like a lot of work to be done, and definitely want to be as careful as possible when you're navigating these steps. So now let's bring us to the next piece. Tell us about how the New York Phil pivoted, so some of the things of the innovation that you brought to your new business model. Yeah,
so it's kind of funny, right? Because innovation is sort of adding cost, and survival is kind of reducing cost. So it's constantly this conversation about how do we invest in a way that's like the leanest possible amount of cost, while at the same time generating the highest amount of impact. And for us, it was a couple of things. So the first thing, we did a program called Bandwagon, which we actually took a sort of very large pickup truck and wrapped it in the logo and the colors of the Philharmonic, and did pop-up concerts, socially distanced pop-up concerts throughout the 5 boroughs and throughout New York City. And so we would take I guess probably about a half dozen musicians overall, and we had kind of a lighting setup and some amplification on some other things. But we did about 85 pop-up concerts over a period of maybe 2 months, I would say, last fall. This was between kind of September, October, maybe into the late part of August as well. So that was a pretty big, relatively inexpensive, impactful thing to kind of make sure that the city was still aware. Hey, we're out here, we're doing concerts, we're making music, and we're, serving the city as we normally would. The other thing that we did.
Wait, Adam, real quick, before you go on to the next one, how was that received? Right, you talked about engagement and customer engagement. How was that? Those pop-ups, how was that received?
Oh, it's great. We got tremendous press. We were out in kind of underserved communities as well. So the donor base definitely supported us. Actually, New York City itself supported us financially related to that project. So we actually came out a little bit ahead from a financial perspective. Again, just sort of direct cost related to that. But yeah, lots of press. The donors and the patrons really loved that.
Love it.
Yeah.
What's the next thing?
Yeah, so the next big thing that we did was we actually launched a media platform. We have a pretty robust archives program, and we do audio recordings, we do video recordings of like live from Lincoln Center telecast over the years, and basically every concert week that we have. So every program is recorded for archival purposes. And we actually went back and remastered a lot of that content, and then launched a media platform called NYPhil Plus. Which is, I think, plus.nyphil.org. We priced it out very, very cheaply, very inexpensive. So it's $4.99 a month or $50 a year, which I think makes us the least expensive kind of media platform in the performing arts space at the moment. But yeah, I mean, we launched that, I think it was about 2 months ago, give or take. And we've seen very, very solid response in terms of number of subscribers. And kind of overall revenue to offset that. So the way this will work, we've got about 50 hours of content posted on that platform now. Most of it's remastered archival content, but we're also doing, recordings of when we can get the musicians together. We'll put, let's say 15 or 20 musicians, socially distanced, no audience, record them, and then that new content will come up about once a month. So overall, a very strong success, I would say.
Yeah, no, that's awesome to hear some of those stories. Adam, I'm sure you never thought, at New York Phil that you would ever have a media platform that you'd be, leading and getting out there. How was it as far as getting organizational buy-in? What was the board's reaction? How did the whole process work to kind of get this, from an idea to reality?
Yeah, we were very lucky, and that the 2 board co-chairs that we have, and really the entire executive committee, has never slowed us down or has never rejected kind of any of the proposals or any of the pivots that we have done over the last really 12 months or so. And whether it's the New York Phil Plus platform or bandwagon or the reduction in staffing or negotiating with the musicians, we spent 7 months actually. I did at the table negotiating with AFM, the musicians union. Again, kind of making them partners, and our board, in terms of the co-chairs and the executive committee, have never been more supportive and helpful than they were all the way through this process. So there was, as long as we were moving and as long as we were making decisions, which I think is kind of the most important thing in this, paralysis, there's a time, for really doing a lot of deep, rigorous analysis. This is not that time. It's really thinking about reacting, making a decision, and if it's a problem, you course correct and move on. And the board has been totally supportive of us through that process.
Adam, when you think about innovation, a lot of people think it's the home run idea. I think we'd love to hear a little bit when you talk about bandwagon and the New York Phil Plus app. Was there iterations there? Was that something that you kind of, what about this and what about this? And did you finally arrive to something, or were both of those just big, huge aha moments that came from a different place in the organization and said, yep, we got to go do this right away? Or were there iterations there that allowed for innovation to kind of happen?
Yeah, I would say, in terms of iterations, the senior management team meets and have met weekly, and ideas come up from all across the organization. It can come from marketing, it can come from artistic or the programming side, it can come from operations and production. So at least bandwagon started out as a concept, actually, through the artistic side. And everybody just sort of jumped on it. We got out there, we figured out, okay, how are we going to do this? What's the truck look like? How can we get some designs where we're going to wrap this thing? Where are we going to go in New York City? So it definitely didn't seem fully baked, so to speak, before we actually got out and did this. We just recognized that we had to be active and we had to be, out of New York City, out in front of our patrons, so that people knew that we were still alive, so to speak. And then I think with the media platform, it's something that we planned over a couple of months. It took some time to negotiate with the platform vendor and kind of get everything aligned in terms of remastering archival content, which took some time with the videographer and the sound crew and all that kind of stuff. So it wasn't, I would say, as impulsive, so to speak. But yeah, we knew we wanted to get it out. There were several organizations, orchestras, and other companies who were doing media platforms. So we knew we wanted to be kind of at the front end of that pack, not the back end. And I think, again, like if we need to change content or if we need to change a strategy, whether it's radio broadcast inclusion or whatever, the important thing is to sort of go to market as soon as possible. And then, as you said, we can iterate or course correct based on whatever information we're getting beyond that point.
Great, thanks, Adam. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
We'll move on to Woodland Park Zoo, but before I do that, I just want to remind the panelists there's some specific questions to each of you in the Q&A section of the webinar that you can either respond directly to our attendees, or if you want to say it live, you can go ahead and do that. But just wanted to remind everyone to check that. So Michele, I'll turn it over to your team. Same question. Looking back over the past year, what is you kind of seen as the biggest challenge or challenges you've faced as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic?
Sure. Well, first and foremost, we were a little prepared. So back in January, I was at a conference with our CEO, and we saw that things were spiking up in China. And I asked around to a whole room of zoo conference attendees, does anybody have a pandemic, program or business continuity program to share? And everybody said no. And I looked at my CEO and I said, we're going to need to make one, because I just have a feeling, and my background is I've worked at the airlines, worked through 9/11, so I'm very risk averse and want to have plans in place just in case for a rainy day. So we came back from that conference in February and we prepared our senior leaders for what if we would shut down, how would we act, how would we operate? And so we got the senior leadership team together and worked on a phase 3 plan. Phase 1 opening, phase 2, we're halfway open, and phase 3 totally closed. And that was a review of all contracts. It was a review of how we may operate. And then actually all the way through February, we were able to deliver that plan to the entire organization. So then in March, when we were closed down, we were much more prepared than any other organization here because we had gone through those phases. But some of the challenges that we went through was, when could we open up? How were we going to do contact tracing? How were we going to program a POS that we had no plans of programming for time ticketing until the end of the year? And so a lot of projects that we were putting on the back burner got moved up to the forefront because they were vital for us to reopen. You'll hear Toni talk about some of the pivots, but we have reimagined the admissions team, who were now really sitting at home and getting paid to do nothing, as well as our events team, to come up with a reopening plan. So we closed March 12th. And by April 24th, the team had to me, in partnership with many other stakeholders, a 96-page reopening plan that we then started to lobby with the government, which then allowed us to open at the end of June to members for 2 days to kind of test our program, because our members are the most forgiving. And then we then pivoted to opening to the public. And I think some of the challenges of what we've learned is a lot of signage, a lot of pivots for the marketing program and membership things that we've done. There were a lot of things around masks. As you know, masks have been a very political statement. And so there were a lot of challenges around that. But our main goal was that we are a beacon for the community, and we wanted to get open because we knew that parents were at home on Zoom calls and really didn't have the care to be doing all of their, teacher lessons and things like that. And so really my executive leadership team down to the senior level, senior leadership team really worked together to go to a back to basics plan. And what we're talking about is, how do you continue to strive for conservation and your mission at the same time in the middle of a pandemic? And you'll see that we immediately worked with our development team, who then did a relief fund, and we started to move through some of those challenges. We moved pretty quickly here at the Woodland Park Zoo, and the teams took about 2 weeks to measure the property of 6 feet, one-way paths, putting up signage, all those different types of things. It was a very big effort for us. And also we have animals in our care that could actually get COVID-19. So there was a lot of protocols that were put in place by our zookeepers to keep them safe, to keep the animals safe, and to make sure that we were all moving safely through this. And working with our Human Resources Department, or People and Culture, was putting together a contact tracing program, not only for our guests, but for our employees. So there was a lot of challenges that we worked really hard together to do to kind of pivot us to where we needed to be.
Go ahead, Dean. I think you're up.
Okay, I was going to say, yeah. So Michele, when you think about some of the big pivots that you've had to do, so many challenges. I can't even imagine thinking about measuring out a zoo, right? Or you're living in a pandemic and being worried about the animals that are in your care. What are some of the biggest pivots that you're really proud of, and how you made those? And, talk about the impact of some of those pivots.
I'm going to turn that over to Toni Godwin-Sells, because she was part of those pivots, and I'd like to highlight her today.
And I'll start with, if anybody ever wants to measure their venue, I got the tools. I can tell you how to do it. So just as a community institution, as Michele said, we understand our role and we are a resource to that community. And it pushed us and motivated us to not only pivot, but reimagine, reinterpret everything that we thought we knew, we had to undo. And that is such a challenge that we all thrive on here at Woodland Park Zoo. Michele's team does move fast, and we moved quickly. So we were able to do a lot of our on-site, kind of what Marilee spoke about. It's that interactive one-on-one. We had to turn that to virtual. How do you raise revenue? How do you bring the zoo to the people? When the people can't come to the zoo, we got you. So we created something called Call of the Wild. We could come into your living room. You could meet an animal. You could meet the keeper. You could talk about it. You could learn about it. And in turn, that ended up being a very small revenue generator for us that became very big very quickly. You see how animated I am about it. It's that cool. So we'll get you to the Call of the Wild. And we've been able to develop a lot of our other programmings. How do you take a beer event that was on site so successful, taste your beers, meet the distillers? We brought that to your living room, and we were able to do that incredibly successfully. So we were able to figure out how do you socially distance and pick up your package, buy your ticket, do the distillery video, all those things. And we were able to do that so successfully, we wanted to do it again. But given that we're now in phase 3, we're going to bring the people back to our zoo. So we're pretty pumped about that. The other, go ahead, please.
No, please. I love it. I love the energy. I love the passion. I do have some follow-up questions for you.
Yeah, please do. I want to mention one other big event that we do. We do a lighted event. And what that means for us is after hours, we light up our zoo in these beautiful vistas, and we bring our guests to the zoo. And we were able to do that with that 25% capacity rollout. And we were able to run a 54-night operation in the middle of a pandemic, 25% capacity, and we sold out every single night. It was so successful that the governor, who closed us down on March 12th, visited our zoo, and it was the first time he had ever been outside of his state capital home, was for our Wild Lanterns event. That is a kudos to us. And you'll probably hear that that's probably one of the most things that we're proud of. But that just tells you how hard we worked to create something safe, fun, and really community oriented, and just such grand support for us. And so we really took our community role very seriously, and we were successful. So
I love it, Toni. I think that, the culture of innovation and imagination, I think all of us are feeling it through your words that you just shared. Toni, let me ask you a question though. Those are lots of different pivots that you were able to do. Do you have a culture that allows for that? Tell us a little bit about where these ideas came from, like Adam, the iteration behind it, or was it just somebody like, you're a genius, you came up with this? Tell us a little bit more.
Well, it's a little bit of everything. I would say that Michele is my direct supervisor, and she really allows us to flex our wings. And that's an acronym we like to use here. It's something we play with. We were able to expand and push, and she charged us to do so. If you could ever in your career here at Woodland Park Zoo do something different, do it today. Do it now. What is it? Nothing is bad. Nothing is too small, too big. Let's see what we can do. Stick the pasta to the wall, see what slides down, and see what's go. And that's exactly what we did. We got in a room, we threw everything in there, and we're like, that's crazy, let's try it. And then Michele would take it to the board and go, my crazy people want to do this. And we were able to do it. And so Michele helped foster the support, and she allowed us to bring our ingenuity to what we needed to repivot, to reimagine. And we are so surrounded by incredible talent. It was such a demonstration. It was powerful. I wish there were people and culture people in here, HR people, to really be able to push every single employee from the entry level on out. What would you want to do? And that was our moniker. That's what we move forward with.
I love it. We believe in that here as well. Spread your wings from the Seattle Woodland Park Zoo. Over here at Armanino, we call that being empowered. But yes, it comes from everywhere. And if every person is willing to take a step forward, and if you can create that culture, I think that goes a really long way. I think that's the undertone, Marilee, Adam, that we're hearing in all of this, is that you have a culture of just let's continuously engage our population, hearing that all over the place. Okay, great. Is there anything else that we wanted to highlight, Toni or Michele or Valerie, for any of your pivots?
would like to offer that one of our many of our daily operation pivots was the time ticketing implementation, as Michele referred to. That kind of saved the bacon, so to speak. We're still moving forward with that. We hope to continue on with that. Our operational protocols as far as cleaning, I mean, listen, people touch everything. And so when they come to the zoo, they can't help themselves. And we have had to really push to pivot to stay ahead of folks to keep them safe to visit our zoo. So that's a couple of key pieces that it's pushed our daily operations. As an overseer of those operations, I will continue those protocols. That is something that will continue to keep us safe. And honestly, have you had a common cold since you've worn your mask? Probably not. So these are some of the protocols that we'll continue with. Thank you for asking.
Awesome, Toni. All right, with that, we'll get to our next polling question. This is polling question 3. If you missed one of the ones earlier, make sure you answer this one.
This question is, did your organization create a new revenue stream during this last year? So yes or no. We'll give everyone about 10 more seconds here to respond.
The interesting thing about this, Marie, is it's not just creating the revenue stream. It doesn't seem like, they weren't that huge for the ones that we've heard about today, but the impact of these engagement was huge, right? And I think that's a major takeaway. With that, let's see the result. All right, 50-50. Very cool to see. Okay, Matt, let's go to next.
Yes, I know we're running low on time, so I'll just ask, one last question to our panelists, and I guess it's kind of a 2-part question, and we'll go back to Marilee Jennings. First, looking at the past year, what are you most proud of as far as the way your organization's adapted to this pandemic, the way your teams have worked together, anything of that nature? And then the second part of the question is, and what have you done this year that you may carry forward that you did as a result of the pandemic, but hey, you may continue to do this even as we get back to, some normalcy here, hopefully in the very near future. So Marilee, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. I think that, this pivot to embracing technology will have changed this museum forever. So I think that we're very proud that we were able to translate the creativity of our team into an entirely different platform. So all of a sudden we've discovered new muscles and new ways of engaging the community. And I don't think we're going to let it go in the future. We'll, of course, celebrate the hands-on nature of our museum, but I'm guessing that technology will continue to play a pretty significant role in our ongoing engagement of children, families, and schools.
Awesome. It's great to hear. And I look forward to enjoying it with my kids. Adam, same question to you. What are you most proud of, and what do you see, taking forward into the future?
Yeah, I feel like the thing that I'm most proud of is the team kind of not taking anything as required. In other words, there weren't any sacred cows. We kind of started with a relatively blank canvas and said, okay, everything is off the table. Let's just start fresh and see what we can do during this period of time. And, that's everything from kind of the virtual work environment to these different programs and, the media platform and everything else. But I think what will continue forward for us, I kind of go back to, like a lot of industries, the pandemic has accelerated trends that were already happening. And, whether that's technology, Marilee just mentioned that, for the Philharmonic, the media platform is something that I think will continue. In other words, the way that we deliver our product to patrons in their homes, on tour, in our concert hall in New York City. There's lots of different ways, and we need to be capitalizing on every one of those going forward. And the pandemic provided that opportunity. The other piece that I think is really important is that the makeup of staff has completely shifted. Before 100% of our employees were in New York City, and now half of my finance staff, the CFO, the director of finance are in Texas. Our IT team is in Minnesota. We've got other people in Ohio and in Florida. We're looking at a much more distributed support system. And as we think about like the cost that goes into that, I mean, look, we're in New York City. It's incredibly expensive to live here. That means it's incredibly expensive for us to, you know, operate a business from a sort of human capital standpoint. And being able to kind of distribute that and have really great people in different parts of the country, I think is something that is a huge benefit that we'll look to realize in the future.
Thanks, Adam. Great insight. And then again, I'll turn to Woodland Park Zoo. Same question.
Or I'm really most proud of all of the employees here at Woodland Park Zoo because, again, I sound like a broken record, but it is a zoo-wide effort, and we wouldn't be in the recovery mode that we are in today without each and every employee giving that buy-in. And what we like to say is changing our mindset to the pivot. I'm really most proud of also what we'll continue to go through is our digital transformation. We were at a crawl area in our digital transformation. We're now at a walk and looking to run. Again, that's verbiage that we always talk here when we say crawl, walk, run, not pulling the Band-Aid off. There's some programs that we're going to stop doing that just really don't serve us well anymore. And then there is the flexibility and the agility to move and to create. We're still moving at that pace because we are in a phase 3. We're looking to bring back concerts coming up in the summer. This will be our 47th year of concerts. And so there's a lot of planning of bringing people back to feel normal. It gets beautiful here in the summertime. And we want people to start to engage after everyone's getting their vaccination to come back to the zoo and enjoy this open space and learn more about conservation. And really, just kind of pivoting ourselves to where we used to be. Before 2020 and 2019, we closed out a fantastic year. We were looking to launch a comprehensive campaign, and we're building ourselves back up. The changes come here weekly and daily. And so that pace is not going to slow down for us, but now we're actually pivoting back to our strategic and operational plan to get us back to where we were at the end of 2019 to serve our guests.
That is awesome, Michele. I love it. Crawl, walk, run. Love it. Matt, before we get to our last polling question, I do have a question for you. This is a lot of pivoting and changing and on the fly and innovation. And let's just be honest here, accountants like things this is how we've always done it. So there's probably some accounting nuances that we probably want to highlight here. What are some things for people to be thinking about as they're thinking about pivots like this, or if they want to follow some of the ideas of these organizations?
Yeah, I know we have a couple minutes, so just really high level, we've talked about a few different revenue streams and new revenue streams. And for all organizations this year, there'll be, if you haven't already implemented the new revenue recognition rules, you will have to for this year, which requires you to break out the different performance obligations in the contract and make sure you're allocating the right amounts to those different obligations. So if Adam's streaming services has a few different elements that maybe you'd have to break out when you recognize revenue, because when those performance obligations are met, it's something to consider there. Same thing with potentially virtual events, and if there are multiple performance obligations in there, and making sure you're recognizing that revenue as those obligations are being met. The other thing is any tax implications, right, with new types of revenue streams. I mean, most of the things I've heard about, I think are related directly to the purpose of the nonprofit, but if not, is there any UBIT, any taxable income that may result from these new streams. So again, talking with your accounting, your auditors, your tax consultants, et cetera, on those different things. And then lastly, just all the government funding options out there. I think most people went through PPP last year and recorded that the way they did. This year you may be getting the forgiveness. So is that amount coming through as, if you didn't recognize that as revenue previously, is it coming through other income now? PPP2 maybe, you may be getting that. For a lot of the organizations with us, they may be getting the shuttered venues grants and how to record those. And those are considered federal funding. So do you now have a single audit requirement if you receive that this year? Just different things you should be thinking about and talking to your auditors about over the next several months.
Right. Yeah, definitely. Lots of innovation, but then there's just going to be lots of compliance and making sure that we're doing this in the best way possible. With that said, this has been amazing. Let's get to our last polling question here, Marie.
So our last question is, what is the current state of your organization? So are you still closed? Are you in a hybrid model, so limited in person with virtual options? Are you limited in person with capacity and operations? Or are you almost back to normal?
All right, and everybody make sure you get in your answers here. You got to get 3 out of 4 to get your CPE. Awesome, thanks so much. And it looks like hybrid model is what is happening right now. Hopefully as reopenings and vaccinations happen across the country more and more, we'll see more and more reopenings, and talking to stage 3s and what that next level is. I do want to say thank you so much to our panelists. You have been a ray of light to everybody in the nonprofit industry today. So great to have you, and your energy and the culture and the innovation that you've shared today. Really, really happy that we could have your time here today. Thanks so much. And for everybody tuning in, thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. And we look forward to what your organization is going to do to reimagine your future. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, everybody.